Well, hello and welcome to episode 49 of the barn door restoration. Last episode I built the rotisserie. I got the chassis off the frame jig and rotating. This episode I finished off all the little details underneath. There was a lot of little parts that I didn't do because it would have been awkward with it on the frame jig. So where to start? I guess with the frame rail. So I added a little bit of weld on the bottom of the frame rails I hadn't done. And then the reinforcement plate for the frame rail is stitched along the bottom. So I added that. The inner frame panel, back here when I put it together, I hadn't welded this because I thought I was going to do it with a spot welder. Then I realized the spot welder wasn't going to be strong enough. So I had to drill this and plug weld it. Now where those panels are already together, when I drilled it, I don't drill all the way through the first layer because what it usually does is it pushes steel burrs between the two sheets. So I just drill till the point goes through. And then you hit it with the welder with a high heat, it melts that away anyway. So I plug welded those in, smoothed them off, and then I went over the spot welder. So it gives that original spot welded look. The front frame inner panel, basically the same thing. Now I pre-drilled that one, but by that time I knew the spot welder wouldn't work, so I had pre-drilled it. I'd welded in a couple of holes when I assembled it, but the rest was left open, so I plug welded all those in, smoothed it off, and spot welded again to give it the look. And then where the front beam bolts in, the plate that curves around is continuously welded all along to that inner frame panel. There's also a couple stitches on the ends of this front splash panel or vertical panel. The front valance is held on by a couple of brackets and they get welded across the bottom of the frame. Now the driver's side one, where the steering box goes, there was two large holes that were plug welded. Now when they were plug welded at the factory, they didn't fill the hole completely. It was kind of like they had gobs in it and some of the hole was left open. So it's a very rough looking weld. Now I had some of this left on mine, but I could tell it was lumpy weld there. But I did find a good photo of an original metal bus, and you could see how rough the welds were and how many open gaps there were in the hole. It's very similar to the plug welds where the front frame rails are plug welded in here on each side. They were quite rough. The front floor support. So there's the long support that goes in here and then a short one. And the shifter bolts in between the two. Well, these have a little stitch of weld on each side of that shifter area. So, and also these spot weld to the splash panel. So they're spot welded in there. The top one was a bit of a pain to get at. What else was there? Oh, might as well cover the heater duct. This heater duct, it gets welded to the pedal beam right in here. And it also gets welded in two spots to the splash panel. And it's from the inside. Now this back heater tube, as far as I could tell, it was only welded from the top on the inside of these two cross members. So there's weld from the inside before the top hats went on. I don't know if there was weld on the bottom. I couldn't tell from any of parts I had left on this one, and I haven't seen any, so that's something I have to look in a bit more. But I suspect there wasn't any welds on the bottom. The I-beams in here, they had welds across on the inside of the frame and on the outside the frame. So I added all those in. I had tacked them before just to keep them from moving, so I gave them a good weld. The front outriggers, because the front beam has a bracket comes back and bolts under these three holes, this tab couldn't extend onto the frame, so they were short and they were welded in on both sides. Unlike the rear, which is spot welded. In the newer buses, post barn door, this tab is spot welded on. Also the jack points have a bead of weld goes straight across in here. So all 4 of those. Let's see, what else was there? Control tubes. So there's 2 for the park brake cables, park brake handles here, and these 2 they stick past this through this panel about 15 millimeters, and then go back. So they are welded right to this panel. There's 1 gob of weld on the bottom of each tube, and also the accelerator pedal tube that sticks out in 90 millimeters out of the panel. It's also welded there. And then there's the 2 heater control tubes that go up through the floor here, and they come back, and they are welded to the cross member. So there's like a notch that's got like an L-shaped, and the inner point of it, there was a gob of weld that welds all 3 of these together, and on this one here welds those 2 together. And the clutch tube is here. The clutch pedal runs on a pivot right here, and the cable goes through this hole, enters this tube, goes back. There was a bracket, I think I covered that before. So this tube welds to the bracket. It also welds to the flange of this cross member right there. Now the park brake tubes, when they come back here, have standoffs. I covered those before also, so they're welded too. The rest of them tubes weld to the these I-beams as they come by. And then they weld to the cross member where they pass through here. Now the park brake tubes weld to the bottom of the flange of the outriggers on each side on this one. Now on the rear outrigger they actually weld from the top, but on this one here they weld from the bottom. Now the 2 heater control tubes, when they pass under this torsion beam, have basically a little tab that goes up over them, and there's 2 little gobs of weld there to hold it on. I originally thought I could save the old ones, but when I pulled the old tube out, they were quite rusty, so I removed them and made new ones. So they're welded on, and then there's 2 more back here on the side, one each side, that weld in. I think that's most for that. Spot welding. I had between the bulkhead panel, not the bulkhead panel, the top hat, where it's set down on this cross member, I had to spot weld along this inside. I had done the outside ones, but I hadn't done this one in here, so I welded that in. And in the floor, for the bottom of the underseat storage, has a lip that goes against the bulkhead. So I spot welded that down. I had to use the extensions on the spot welder for that. Get in there. It's much harder to spot weld with the extensions on. There's a lot less current, more losses in it, but it come out all right. What else did I do? Oh, the front floor. It has the front outer panels have a lip that comes down, and his inner fender extends past them, and that's spot welded along. And I had an issue with those. This fender was the right length on the outside and the inside, but in the center section they went long. Probably because when I set it up, it was a little hard to tell exactly what angles all this was on. So it was easy enough to grind off a little after. Though I did have to, where the bend for this lip was, I had to work that down a bit. So just by hammer and dolly, I was able to move that bend up towards the level of the floor to tighten the gap from what would be the top side, tighten that up. Oh, I should also mention this floor panel welds to each frame rail. So there's a gob of weld, there's 2 gobs of weld on each side that weld this floor panel down. And also the passenger side floor panel, where it sits on the, basically the underseat storage cover comes down and has a lip that this floor panel sits on. And that gets welded with 2 or 3 gobs of weld. I don't know, I can't tell from mine. I suspect they were different on different buses. But I put three gobs on this one. hold that floor panel down. When I welded the outer floor pieces here, this seam, I need to make sure that it was all in the correct spot. So I wanted to ensure that this fender wasn't sagged down or high, because this could actually flex a bit. So I put a straight edge across on these ridges and clamped it so that these are nice and straight. And I did the same thing on the floor, put a straight edge across and clamped on the floor, ensured that it laid flat down up on the inner piece of the floor. That way I knew that this point was in the correct spot, and then spot welded them. Now, I did have a little problem with the floor being a little wavy here, but I was able to put a few spot welds and tap it to get it nice and straight, to get it straightened out again. So actually quite happy with how this all come out. It looks quite good. The only thing I have left to do, I have to put a little weld around the park brake where the lever comes up. And I have to put a few spot welds on here, but I can do those from the top. Oh, there's one other thing I had to do. There's a harness runs through this frame rail along, and there's these metal tabs, and they just bend around the harness to clamp it in place. And so I had to add these two tabs back here. I'd added the other ones, but I'd forgot to add these two, so I got those in. Well, I guess that about wraps up this episode. I'm actually very happy with how this has come along. It's sort of a milestone having the lower chassis finished. I'm happy with how it came out. Next episode is going back on the frame jig, and then I'm going to start building the upper body up. So I'm going to finish the B-pillar up, and then I'll move around to the front. And thanks for the comments, appreciate them, and thanks for watching.